Think conflict means something's wrong with you? Think again. Conflict isn't failure, it's an invitation to grow. Today I'm sharing how God designed us to navigate tension with grace, not guilt. Welcome to the Truth Be Told Project, where we help you live according to your intended design, God's design, and not by default. In today's episode, we're talking about conflict. Yep, you heard that right. That uncomfortable, messy, totally normal part of life, whether it's a heated moment with your spouse or unspoken tension with a friend or coworker. Conflict is something we all face. But what if we saw it not as a sign of failure, but as an opportunity for growth? Join us as we explore common triggers, examine our own patterns, and discover how God's grace can guide us through every hard conversation with clarity, compassion, and peace. That's what comes up today on the Truth Be Told Project podcast. You ever had a moment where someone said something and it just hit you wrong? Maybe it was a friend, maybe it was your spouse, maybe it was a coworker, and suddenly the air gets tense. You replay that moment in your head a dozen times thinking, was I overreacting? Were they being rude? Were they getting out of pocket? What just happened? If that sounds familiar, you're not alone. Conflict happens to everyone. It shows up in our families, our friendships, our churches, and even inside our own thoughts. And sometimes, especially in Christian spaces, we feel like we shouldn't be having conflict at all. I know that's what I used to think. Like, if we just prayed more or had more faith, we live in some constant state of peace and harmony. But let's be honest, we're human. We've got emotions and wounds that collide with other people's emotions, experiences, and wounds. And that's where the friction begins. So today we're going to talk about conflict, not in a way that shames you or tells you just be more loving, but in a way that helps you understand it better. We'll explore what triggers conflict, why it's completely normal, and how recognizing your own patterns is actually one of the most powerful feelings and freeing things you can do. And we're going to do it through the lens of grace, the kind of grace Jesus extends to us, and the kind we're learning to extend to ourselves and others. So here's what we'll unpack together: why conflict isn't necessarily a sign that something's broken, the common reasons conflicts start, and even when nobody means to hurt anyone, how to gently recognize your own role in tension without spiraling into guilt or shame. Because let's be real, conflict doesn't make you a bad Christian, a bad partner, or a bad friend. It makes you a person. The kind of person Jesus still walks with, teaches, and loves deeply, even in the mess. So grab your coffee, settle in, and let's explore this together without judgment, without pressure. Just a real, honest conversation about what it means to live and love in a world where conflict is part of the story. So let's get into it. Let's start with something simple but powerful. Conflict is normal. We say that, but it's one of those things we don't always believe. Deep down, many of us still carry this idea that conflict means something is wrong with the relationship, or worse, with us. Like if we were just better communicators, more Christian, more Christ-like, more patient, more emotionally intelligent, then we live in this constant state of calm. But that's just not how life or love works. Conflict doesn't mean your relationship is doomed. It doesn't mean you failed. It means you're two people trying to navigate life, and sometimes your wants, needs, expectations, and wounds bump into each other. Think about Jesus and his disciples for a moment. They were people who literally walked with the Son of God. And guess what? They argued. Read your Bible, read the Gospels. They argued. They misunderstood each other. James and John asked for special seats in heaven. Peter cut off a soldier's ear in the heat of the moment. And the disciples debated about who was the greatest. And Jesus didn't say, man, y'all are a mess. I'm done. He stayed, he taught, he corrected, and most of all, he loved. Conflict was a part of their story too. And sometimes conflict arises because we're not heard, or we feel disrespected, or maybe we're tired and something small becomes a bigger deal than it should be. Sometimes it's about past wounds resurfacing. Maybe a tone of voice that reminds you of how your dad used to speak to you when he was angry, or a sudden shutdown from your partner that triggers old abandonment fears. These moments don't just happen in toxic relationships. They happen in normal, healthy ones too. And when we label all conflict as quote unquote bad, we shut down the chance to learn from it, to lean in, to grow. Conflict can actually be a signal, not a disaster, but of opportunity, an invitation to explore something deeper, a place to practice love, truth, patience, and grace. Because let's be real, love isn't tested when everything is perfect. Love shows its strength when things get hard, when tempers flare, when misunderstandings happen, and we choose to stay, listen, and work through it. Now, this doesn't mean conflict should be chaotic or abusive. Healthy conflict still respects boundaries. It doesn't demean or dehumanize. But even when it gets messy, it can be redeemed. We serve a God who works all things, even hard conversations and awkward moments, for good. So if you've been taught that good Christians don't argue, or that conflict is a sign of failure, I just want to gently challenge that today, because avoiding conflict doesn't bring peace. It just buries the problem deeper, and buried things have a way of resurfacing in bigger, more painful ways later. Instead, let's aim for honest peace. The kind that says, hey, I'm upset right now, but I care enough about this relationship to talk through it. That's maturity. That's love. Sometimes we confuse peacekeeping with peacemaking. Peacekeeping avoids the problem to keep things calm. Peacemaking is brave. It's willing to face the mess with grace. It says, I love you enough to not pretend. I trust our connection enough to bring the real stuff to the table. And that's hard, right? Because many of us didn't grow up with healthy models of how to navigate conflict. Maybe you came from a home where people exploded or shut down. Maybe conflict meant fear or rejection. So it makes sense that it still feels uncomfortable, even unsafe. But healing is possible, and it starts with understanding that conflict isn't an enemy. It's a messenger. It's letting you know, hey, there's something here that needs attention, something that matters. You don't have to love conflict to grow from it. You just have to be willing to face it with honesty and compassion. So the next time conflict shows up, instead of spiraling or shutting down, try this. Pause and say to yourself, this is normal. This doesn't mean I'm broken. This is part of being human, and I can navigate it. You're not alone in the tension. God is present even in the uncomfortable. He's not waiting on the other side of resolution. He's right there in the middle, whispering wisdom, grace, and truth into your heart. It's not about changing who you are, but about recognizing, oh, they're not being distant, they're just thinking, or they're not attacking me, they're just direct. And that changes everything. So the next time conflict bubbles up, pause, take a breath, ask yourself, what expectations did I have? And did I communicate them? You also need to ask, what story am I telling myself about this? Could this be triggered by something deeper, even if it's not immediately obvious? And when we understand those triggers, we're way better equipped to respond with clarity instead of confusion and grace instead of defensiveness. So let's start with a big one, unmet expectations. This one sneaks in all the time. Maybe you expected your partner to help with dinner, but they walked in, sat on the couch, and scrolled on their phone. Or you expected a friend to call you back after a tough day, and they didn't. Boom. Now you're hurt. They're confused, and neither of you really knows how it escalated. Unspoken expectations are especially dangerous. If we never communicate them, people don't even know they've let us down, but we're still mad. We end up punishing them for breaking rules they didn't even know existed. Another major trigger, assumptions. We're all storytellers, even if we don't realize it. Something happens and we create a whole internal narrative. He didn't text back, she didn't text back. He's ignoring me, she's ignoring me. He must be mad, or she must be mad, or she rolled her eyes, she thinks I'm stupid, or anything like that. And before we know it, we're reacting to a story, not a fact. Assumptions rob us of clarity. They close the door on curiosity, but when we pause and ask questions instead of jumping to conclusions, we often find that the truth is way less dramatic than we imagine. Then there's past wounds. Sometimes conflict has less to do with the present moment and more to do with past pain that's being touched. Maybe your partner says something critical and it reminds you of being judged by a parent, or your coworker dismisses your idea and suddenly been flooded with memories of never feeling good enough. When we notice, wow, that really stung, and it might be hitting deeper than just this moment, we can respond more intentionally instead of reacting out of old survival patterns. Another common trigger, feeling unseen or unvalued. This one shows up a lot in marriages, friendships, even church communities. We want to know we matter, we want to feel heard, and when we don't, when someone interrupts us, ignores our needs, and forgets something important to us, it can feel like rejection, even if it wasn't meant that way. And then here's something important. Your triggers aren't weaknesses, they're signals. Of course, conflict also shows because of external stress. When we're hungry, tired, anxious, or overwhelmed, our tolerance goes way down. That's not a character flaw, that's biology. So sometimes it's not about the issue at all. It's about the state we're in when the issue hits. That's why being well rested, well fed, and emotionally supported isn't just good for you, it's good for your relationships too. A little margin in your life can prevent a lot of unnecessary conflict. Lastly, we have communication mismatches. This is a biggie. Some people are processors. They need time to think before they speak. That's me. I have to think before I speak. Others are external processors. They need to talk it out in real time. Some value honesty above harmony. Others prioritize keeping the peace. When these styles clash, it's easy to assume the other person doesn't care or isn't trying, even when in reality, they're just wired different. They're not being distant, they're just thinking, or they're not attacking me, they're just direct. And that changes everything. Learning each other's styles in your own creates space for grace, and that changes everything. So the next time conflict bubbles up, pause, take a breath, ask yourself, what expectations did I have, and did I communicate them? You also need to ask, what story am I telling myself about this? Am I tired? Are we just speaking different emotional languages? These little check-ins don't erase conflict, but they soften it. They help you approach the moment with compassion, both for yourself and the other person. And that's what it's all about at the end of the day. Am I tired, overwhelmed, or in a bad headspace right now? Your role in tension. This might be the hardest part to talk about, but also the one that changes everything. What if we played a role in the very tension we're feeling? And now hear me out. This isn't about blaming ourselves or taking on more than we should. It's about owning our piece of the puzzle so we can actually experience more peace and freedom in our relationship. And here's the truth. Most conflict is co-created. Not always equally, not always intentionally, but still co-created. And when we stop pointing fingers only outward and start getting curious about what's going on the inside, that's when growth begins. The Bible talks about this kind of reflection in Matthew chapter 7. Jesus says to first take the plank out of our own eye before addressing the speck in someone else's. That's not to say the other person has no fault, but it reminds us to start with self-awareness. So let's ask a bold question. What's my part in this conflict? Sometimes it's a pattern we didn't know we had. Maybe we interrupt without realizing it. Maybe we get defensive when we feel misunderstood. Maybe we shut down when someone raises their voice, not because we're trying to be difficult, but because it feels safer. These responses often come from past experiences, but just because something is understandable doesn't mean it's unchangeable. We can bring these patterns to the light with compassion, not condemnation, and begin to rewrite them. Other times, our role in conflict shows up in how we communicate. Do we leave things bottled up until we explode? I've done that plenty of times. Do we use sarcasm as a shield? I've done that also plenty of times. Do we assume people should just know how we feel? I've assumed that many a times. These habits might be subtle, but they can create tension over time. And here's where the Christian perspective brings hope. We're not stuck. With the help of the Holy Spirit, we can become more gentle, more honest, more aware. Not perfect, but transformed. Self-awareness is one of the most loving gifts we can offer in any relationship, because when we own our stuff, we create space for real connection. We stop reacting from ego or fear and start engaging with humility and care. And I know this isn't easy. It takes courage to say, yeah, I think I escalated that, or I shut down. I want to do better. But that kind of honesty is powerful. It builds trust. It says, I care enough about this connection to grow through the hard parts. It's also okay to realize that you don't have the full picture, that your perception, while valid, may not be the whole truth. That's why curiosity is your superpower. Instead of assuming, ask. Instead of defending, explore. Help me understand what you were feeling when you said that. That one sentence can shift the entire dynamic. You're not weak for taking responsibility. You're strong for stepping out of the blame cycle, the blame game, part of human nature. We see that in the book of Genesis. Adam blamed Eve, Eve blamed the devil, Adam blamed God for giving him Eve, and so on and so forth. The blame cycle is a part of human nature. But when you take responsibility, you're strong, taking a strong approach. You're living the gospel, extending grace, seeking truth, and showing up with humility. And let's be real, we all have blind spots. That's part of being human. The more we ask God to search our hearts, the more he gently reveals things that don't need to stay hidden, not to shame us, but to set us free. Psalm 139 says, "Search me, God, and know my heart. See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting." That's not a prayer of guilt. That's a prayer of growth. And if you're thinking, okay, but what if the other person never owns their part? It's hard. I get it. Believe me, I get it. But remember, your healing isn't dependent on their behavior. Your peace doesn't have to wait for their apology. You can take responsibility for your part and still have boundaries. You can choose clarity over control. Taking ownership isn't about taking all the blame. It's about reclaiming your power to grow, to change, to lead with love, even when it's hard. And don't underestimate what that does in someone else's heart. Sometimes your self-awareness becomes an invitation for them to look inward too. Not always, but sometimes. The most disarming thing you can do is say, "I'm sorry for my part." Even if theirs was bigger, that kind of humility can soften the entire room. So let's be people who don't just look outward, but inward. People who ask hard questions, tell the truth gently, and trust God to do the deep heart work in us and through us. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be willing. So if you've made it this far, first of all, I want to say thank you. Secondly, I want to say take a deep breath, because this conversation, it takes guts, it takes heart, and it takes a willingness to be honest with yourself, which isn't always easy, but it's so worth it. Conflict is a part of life. It doesn't mean your relationships are broken or that you're failing. It means you're human, you're engaging, you're growing. And every time you choose reflection over reaction, curiosity over assumptions, grace over blame, you've moved, and you're moving towards something deeper, stronger, and more beautiful. So let's do a quick recap. We talked about how conflict isn't a flaw, it's a feature of real relationships. Even the closest friendships and marriages go through seasons of tension. What matters most isn't avoiding it, but how we walk through it. We broke down some common triggers: unmet expectations, old wounds, feeling unseen, external stress, mismatched communication styles. When you start to see those patterns clearly, you gain the ability to pause, to reflect, to respond, not just react. Then we explore the idea of personal ownership, not because you're always at fault, but because recognizing your part is empowering. It's where transformation begins, and through it all, we centered everything on grace. The grace God gives you and the grace you can extend to others. Here's the truth. You can be someone who brings peace into every room you enter, not because you avoid hard things, but because you've learned to meet them with wisdom. love, and the quiet strength that comes from walking with God. And if you're in a place right now where conflict feels overwhelming, I want to say this clearly. Please hear me. You are not alone. You don't have to navigate it perfectly. You just have to be willing to show up one honest moment at a time. Ask for help, journal it out, pray, talk to a counselor or professional. Be gentle with yourself. This is lifelong work. No one has it all figured out, but you're on the path. You're asking questions, leaning into growth, and that matters more than you know. So this week, here's your invitation. When conflict pops up, pause, breathe, ask yourself, what might be going on beneath the surface? Get curious about yourself, about the other person, about the story you're telling yourself. Speak gently, even when you're frustrated. Set boundaries with love and own your part without shame. And through it all, keep grace at the center. Grace for them, grace for you, grace for the messy middle where growth is born. You are capable of navigating conflict in a way that honors both truth and love. You don't need to be perfect, just present, just willing. If this episode spoke to you, would you share it with someone who needs to hear it? Maybe a friend, a small group, a family member who's wrestling with a hard relationship. Let's keep the conversation going, because healing multiplies when we walk through it together. And hey, if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to the podcast or to the YouTube channel so you never miss an episode. We've got more honest, grace-filled conversations coming your way. Thanks for listening. You're doing better than you think. Keep going. Remember, don't just live by default, live by design. God's design. Peace.